on the extraordinarily low side, as Herman may speak about later. China is closer to 14 to 16%, and in the Philippines, it's higher. It's 50 to 60%. In Latin America, sometimes it can be higher than that. I'm not advocating that that's right, and in fact, I have some questions about what's happening in the Philippines. But generally speaking, I think that it's always above the commercial rate, and people are trying to reduce it as much as possible. The components that go into a rate are, one, the cost to deliver the service, two, the cost to fund, where do you get your money to do this work, and most organizations aren't allowed to take savings, so they have to borrow for it. So they're actually borrowing at the commercial rate, so they certainly can't charge it. And then, there's an element of loan portfolio recovery. So those are the, I think that's the short answer to your question. It's a very complicated and emotional issue.
We have problems with the Canadian banks, have problems getting loans from the commercial banks because obviously they are getting money from the people the commercial banks don't trust.
Well, it's an important question. I think it's gone from the perspective more broadly, and I think you have to think of it beyond the Grameen Bank. They operate in a special regulatory environment in a special country where microfinance, it's the only country in the world where probably anyone who wants access has it. In Bangladesh, if you look at all of the other countries in which we work, and we work with local entrepreneurs, we don't run microfinance institutions ourselves. Those organizations are, I've actually lost my train of thought. Well, remind me what your question was.
Like with Green banks have problems getting loans from
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, so in fact, I think the realization has transitioned from you can't lend to poor people because they won't repay to we just don't know how to do it, those people do. So there's been an evolving recognition in places like India, the Philippines in particular, much slower behind in Indonesia, much slower behind in China, in fact not existing yet today in China, and in Pakistan sort of somewhere in the middle between those. It's something we spend a lot of time on. I started Grameen Foundation 6 years ago, and that's what I started working on as a program. We raised $30 million in guarantees that were then used to catalyze or encourage local banks to lend to microfinance. We, as an organization, turned that $30 million into $125 million in local currency financing. We just increased the pool by double. And so we're really looking at how do we continue to encourage banks to get involved. One, by teaching them, and two, by encouraging them through the guarantee. In terms of career choices, I wouldn't say that I sort of mapped out my career early and figured out this was where I wanted to be. I grew up in a rural part of the U.S. For those of you who know the U.S. well, I grew up in Vermont. It's along the Canadian border. Probably the least diverse, in fact, I think I just saw it, is actually the least diverse state in America. And that's, for some of the states in America, a pretty hard thing to do. It's small, it's rural. There are sort of two things that I think influenced my move into social causes, maybe three. First, I grew up in a family. My grandfather was a minister and incredibly involved in the civil rights movement. My mom was at Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. So, you start in with your family. The second thing is something that I remember. I was young, probably 8. The Ethiopian famine was going on. They showed a video. I think I was scarred permanently by that experience. I'm not sure I would advocate that I have small children doing that, but I think it changed my awareness about what was out there in the world. And then third, in terms of how you work with people who are significantly more disadvantaged, I worked very actively with the homeless community in Washington, D.C. The homeless community is probably one of the poorest communities in America, or at least most disadvantaged. And not only do you have medical issues, but you do have lack of home, lack of shelter, lack of food. And I worked with that community when I was in college. Because I could speak the language, talk to them, and sort of knew everybody. My parents would come and I would know all the homeless guys on the street. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, well, these are really great people. But I learned there that no matter what your straits, no matter how it makes me feel to be working with these people. The most important thing is they're still human beings with dignity, and that, you know, if someone doesn't like something, they're not just going to take it because they don't have anything else. And I know that seems like something that's very simple, but actually a lot of development comes from what I think is right for you, not from the person saying, this is what I need or what I want at this time. And through that work, I was able to see that. And then I got into banking, and it just seemed to fit. In terms of what I would recommend for people to do, to the extent that you can afford to do it, try to do volunteer programs or go out and meet the people that you think you want to serve and listen to what they have to say. Don't learn in school, it's important, but go out and hear firsthand. When I start to be worried, I hear, oh, we're over indebting everyone, they don't need money. The first thing I do is I go out and I listen. And if that's what someone out in the field is saying to me, then I think we have it wrong. But if someone's saying, I need more money, or I need this, or I think, yeah, we're on the right track. Just listen to the people we're actually trying to work with. And so I would encourage you to think about where and try that. And as you do that, learn to speak the language, become very ingrained, and find ways to continue engaging with people and places as much as you can. So, I'm sorry, you had a question also.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you very much for the talk. Basically, I have a particular question about the... Okay, great. This is better. I was wondering, for your weekly repayment scheme, because like in my mind, like from a commercial point of view, if you have like the repayment in weekly, like basically wouldn't you lose out a lot of the profitability, the profits into like the transaction costs? Like I just wonder like what's the rationale behind this weekly payments?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're right, it's significantly more expensive. That's why the cost of delivering microfinance services is relatively high if you compare it to a bank. In many cases, it can cost between 15 cents to 25 cents on every dollar to actually do this. So that's the challenge. On the other side, the question is, how do you need to structure a loan so that a poor person is actually able to repay it? And the way that this was designed was to say that instead of telling someone you owe 100 in 6 months, and then they get to 6 months from now, and all of a sudden, where am I going to get this huge chunk of money? You say, pay $1 or $2 every week over this period of time. It makes it seem very manageable, and it does become very manageable for a person. And so that's really the logic behind it. How do we continue to reduce costs without making this manageable? Technology is one way. I talked about mobile technology. That's kind of the next wave. How do we use mobile phones to make that easier, more effective? It can include everything from transferring money on a phone to reducing the number of meetings each month and things that are happening. But we're sort of continually trying to look at new models to do this. But right now, this is the best we have. Are there other questions? Sorry, in the back, and then I'll come here.
Hi, Jennifer. I wonder if there are any failure cases of microfinance. For failure, what I mean is, for example, the money didn't go to the needy, or some villages have a much higher default rate than the normal. And if there are any such cases, what's the reason behind, you think?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's a great question. And as in any industry, we've had our success and we've had our failure. A massive organization, one of the leading organizations in Morocco, failed last year. In Pakistan, an organization we are very close to was essentially bailed out in a kind of U.S.-style TARP bailout, essentially. We've seen challenges in India and other places. The single most dangerous force against microfinance is political interference. That's the first. And I can understand how it happens. We've been talking about what rates are charged. Most governments, starting with the one up above us in China, provide subsidized services to poor people because all of us would agree that if we can, let's offer something lower price for someone who needs it. But unfortunately, what we often see is there's a moral hazard.